what I said about the material things I've got, everything just meant nothing at that point. I was desperately unhappy. I wasn't particularly enjoying my work, and I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to become a vampire then.
Picture a man who turned nobodies into global superstars, whose razor-sharp tongue and unerring instincts built an entertainment empire watched by millions. Simon Cowell, the genius behind American Idol, The X Factor, and Got Talent, seemed untouchable, a titan who redefined television. But behind the dazzling spotlight lies a story not of glamour, but of heartbreak, sacrifice, and a relentless battle to escape invisibility. This is the haunting truth of Simon Cowell, a man whose greatest victories were won not on stage, but in the shadows of his own pain. If his shows ever sparked your dreams, moved you to tears, or made you laugh, stay with us to uncover the devastating cost of his legacy and the humanity that lies beneath. A childhood starved of warmth. Simon Cowell's story begins not under the glare of studio lights, but in the cold silence of a childhood starved of affection. Born on October 7, 1959, in Lambeth, London, and raised in the quiet town of Elstree, Hertfordshire, Simon grew up in a family that shimmered with outward success, but hid deep emotional fractures. His mother, Julie Brett, a ballet dancer and socialite, glided through life with elegance, her poise masking a distance that left Simon yearning for her warmth. His father, Eric Selig Philip Cowell, a music executive and property developer, measured worth in discipline and achievement, offering little praise. "My father never said, 'I'm proud of you,' even when I needed it most," Simon later confessed, his voice heavy with the ache of those unspoken words. That absence became a lifelong scar, a shadow that trailed him into every room, every decision, every silent night. School offered no escape. At Radlett Preparatory School and later Dover College, Simon was not the star pupil his parents might have hoped for, but a restless boy who broke rules and clashed with authority. He was overlooked by peers, present but unseen, his presence fading into the margins of classrooms. "I was the boy nobody remembered," he once said, the sting of those years still raw. Scraping through with only a GCE in English and sociology, he left school not with relief, but with the crushing weight of failure. In a family where excellence was currency, Simon felt bankrupt, haunted by the verdict that whispered through his youth, "You are not enough." Yet, in that rejection, a fire began to smolder. A defiance that would one day set the entertainment world ablaze. The mailroom, a crucible of humiliation. With no clear path forward, Simon's father secured him a job in the mailroom at EMY Music, a gesture born more of pity than pride. It was a humiliating start for a young man dreaming of greatness. Each morning, Simon carried coffee to producers who never learned his name, sorted fan mail for artists whose voices filled arenas, while his own presence dissolved into invisibility. "I was nothing in a world obsessed with the spotlight," he later recalled, the memory stinging with raw ache. The humiliation was unbearable, and he left EMY once, too ashamed to stay. But the world outside offered only more rejection. Doors slammed shut. Confidence crumbled. In despair, he crawled back to the mailroom he despised, admitting years later that he would cry quietly in the bathroom after work, haunted by the fear that his life had peaked before it began. Yet, in that crucible of humiliation, Simon found resolve. The mailroom became his silent classroom, where he studied not just music, but power itself, how fame was packaged, how stars were created, how dreams were sold. Every unopened letter, every stack of records taught him the mechanics of an industry that thrived on connection. The boy who had been starved of affection was hardening into a man who would force the world to notice. Rejection didn't break him. It forged him, carving a relentless, almost ruthless ambition that would carry him far beyond the mailroom's shadows. Fanfare's rise and ruin. By the early 1980s, Simon dared to risk everything. With EMI's backing, he launched Fanfare Records, a gamble that briefly seemed blessed. Hits like Sanita's So Macho brought glittering success. Parties, champagne, handshakes with people who once ignored him. For the first time, the boy who had been invisible tasted the intoxicating sparkle of recognition. But the music industry is merciless. Trends shifted, the market turned, and Fanfare collapsed with brutal speed. By the decade's end, the label was an empty shell. Offices abandoned, contracts worthless. Simon, barely in his 30s, was left with nothing but debts and despair. Friends vanished, creditors circled, and the humiliation cut deeper than any failure before. He returned to his parents' home, retreating to the same childhood bedroom that once echoed with loneliness, now whispering failure. "That time nearly broke me," he admitted years later, his voice haunted by the memory of a life that felt like a ghost's. To the world, it was a failed business venture. To Simon, it was personal devastation, as if the boy starved of affection had grown into a man stripped of dignity. Yet, in the ashes of Fanfare, something fierce rose. Failure didn't end him, it reforged him. He began to study not just music, but the architecture of fame itself. What makes an audience fall silent? What makes them erupt in cheers? What makes them remember? Every sleepless night, every bitter taste of defeat became fuel for a man who would one day seize television by the throat and rewrite the rules of entertainment. Rebuilding from ashes. The early 1990s were not a triumph for Simon, but an act of survival. Returning to the music industry at BMG, he carried the stain of Fanfare's collapse, whispered about as a man whose empire had crumbled before it began. Every meeting was a reminder of humiliation, every handshake laced with doubt. Swallowing pride, he tore apart his illusions of chasing timeless artists and rebuilt his philosophy from the ground up. "I learned the hard way," he later said. "Sell records first, earn respect later." Necessity drove him to sign acts others sneered at. Pop groups like Five, ballad duos like Robson and Jerome, boy bands like Westlife. Critics mocked them as cheap, but their records sold millions. Each success was bittersweet, tainted by the scorn of an industry that dismissed him even as he outsold their stars. Simon's greatest lesson was brutal but clear. Fame wasn't about perfection, it was about connection. He turned rejection into a compass, following the heartbeat of the crowd rather than the approval of insiders. But the road was steep and lonely. For every hit, there were nights of fear, the dread of another collapse lurking behind every chart victory. "There were nights I lay awake, convinced I'd lose it all again," he confessed, revealing the fragility beneath his victories. Yet, it was this fear that sharpened his instincts, preparing him for the revolution that would define his legacy, the television revolution. In 2001, Simon stepped from boardrooms to the blazing stage of television with Pop Idol. Many believed he was unfit for the screen, too blunt, too cold, too cruel. But what critics called cruelty, audiences called truth. His sharp tongue, piercing honesty, and refusal to sugarcoat failure electrified viewers weary of polite lies. Pop Idol became a phenomenon, and when American Idol launched in 2002, Simon's transformation was complete. His raised eyebrow, cutting remarks, and withering silences became as iconic as the performances themselves. By the mid-2000s, with the X Factor in the UK and Got Talent spreading globally, Simon was no longer a music executive. He was the arbiter of dreams, watched by over 600 million viewers across 100 countries. The press crowned him the most powerful man in television. But power carried a heartbreaking price. The bluntness that made him famous also made him despised. Booed in public, ridiculed in tabloids, he was painted as a villain by those who saw only cruelty and none of the conviction. I knew people hated me, he admitted, but I couldn't pretend to be someone I wasn't. The schedule was merciless. Endless auditions, live shows, global franchises, the crushing weight of entire brands on his shoulders. Nights vanished into strategy meetings, days into criticism, too harsh, too soft, too commercial. The higher he climbed, the more isolated he became. Friends drifted away, romances faltered, and the boy once starved of affection became a man starved of peace. Even surrounded by lights and applause, I often felt completely alone, he confessed, the irony devastating. Success filled his bank accounts but drained his sense of belonging, turning his empire into a gilded prison. The scandal that shattered control. In 2013, Simon's carefully constructed world imploded. News broke that he was expecting a child with Lauren Silverman, the wife of his close friend Andrew. The scandal was a firestorm. Headlines screamed betrayal, tabloids dissected every detail, and the man who controlled narratives became the judged. Friends turned their backs, whispers followed him, and trust, once broken, proved impossible to repair. Andrew filed for divorce, citing adultery, and Simon, the titan of television, longed for the invisibility he had once despised. "It was not something I'm proud of," he admitted in a rare moment of candor, his voice heavy with regret. For a man built on control, this was his most powerless moment. Yet, from that chaos came salvation. In February 2014, Simon held his son, Eric, and the world shifted. The mogul who lived for ratings now lived for bedtime stories, Lego towers, and the quiet miracle of fatherhood. "My priorities changed completely," he said. "My world wasn't about contracts anymore. It was about him." Associates noticed a transformation. The relentless judge softened, his sharpness replaced by patience. Fatherhood didn't erase the scandal's scars, lost friendships, lingering guilt, but it gave them meaning. Eric became Simon's anchor, a fragile miracle that pulled him from the wreckage of his darkest chapter. The weight of loss. In 2015, as Simon adjusted to fatherhood, life dealt a devastating blow. The death of his mother, Julie, at 89. A former ballet dancer, she had been the elegant but distant anchor of his childhood. Her approval a prize he chased but rarely won. Her passing stripped Simon of his armor, forcing him to cancel X-Factor commitments and retreat into grief. "Losing my mom was the hardest thing I've ever gone through," he said, the silence after her death unbearable. The loss echoed the pain of losing his father, Eric, in 1999, before Simon's global success. The regret of never hearing his father's pride compounded the ache of Julie's absence. With both parents gone, Simon felt untethered, a son grieving the roots that had shaped him. Grief sparked transformation. Simon began to prioritize family over fame, speaking less of ratings and more of presence. Those who worked with him noticed a new softness, a vulnerability that replaced arrogance. The man who thrived on control learned to embrace the fragility of life, his softened demeanor a testament to the scars that reshaped him, the accidents that broke and remade him. In August 2020, at 60, Simon faced a near-fatal reckoning. Testing a powerful electric bike in his Malibu courtyard, he was thrown to the ground, his back shattering in multiple places. "I came within a minute of not making it," he recalled, the memory chilling. 6 hours of surgery and a steel rod in his spine saved him, but the verdict was stark. One wrong move could cost him mobility forever. The titan who judged dreams was confined to a hospital bed, struggling to lift a glass, haunted by pain that turned nights into marathons of torment. The deepest wound wasn't physical, it was the fear of leaving Eric, his 6-year-old son, without a father. "I thought of Eric, and I knew I had to fight," he said, each agonizing step in recovery a triumph cheered by his son's laughter. In early 2022, fate struck again. A second e-bike accident shattered his arm and bruised his face. The humiliation was merciless, headlines mocking him as reckless. To be knocked down twice felt like punishment. Yet, Simon's defiance burned brighter. The accidents forced him to confront his mortality, trading relentless ambition for gratitude. "They changed me in every way," he admitted, his voice softer, his priorities clearer. Eric became his greatest healer, his laughter a promise that survival mattered. The accidents didn't just scar Simon, they remade him, teaching him that even legends must fight, fall, and rise again. The mirror of vanity. By 2021, Simon faced a different judgment: his appearance. Years of Botox and fillers meant to defy age had altered his face beyond recognition. Fans gasped, tabloids mocked, and memes spread mercilessly. "I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself," he confessed, the admission heavy with existential weight. For a man who judged appearances, being judged for his own was a brutal irony. The scrutiny stung, and Simon withdrew, reducing TV appearances and skipping promotional tours. The man who controlled narratives had lost control of his own reflection. Yet, from this humiliation came clarity. Simon abandoned cosmetic treatments, choosing to age with dignity. "Enough," he decided. "Let it show." The decision was a declaration of peace with himself, a rejection of the illusion of invincibility. Fans began to see not a caricature, but a man embracing vulnerability. The wrinkles he once fought became marks of survival, a reminder that authenticity outlasts illusion. "I don't need to be everywhere anymore," he said. "I just want to be there when Eric laughs." The heartbreak of Liam Payne. In September 2024, tragedy struck with unbearable cruelty. Liam Payne, the 16-year-old Simon had placed in One Direction, died at 31 in a fall from a Buenos Aires hotel balcony. For Simon, it was like losing a son. Liam wasn't just a star, he was family. His nervous 2010 audition a memory Simon cherished. The loss was unnatural, a young life extinguished too soon. "Too young, too cruel," Simon whispered, his grief solitary. Projects halted, cameras stopped, and he retreated to quiet nights with Eric, holding him tighter, as if clinging to every moment Liam would never have. Replaying Liam's audition tapes became a ritual of mourning, each laugh a wound, each song a ghost. The helplessness was unbearable for a man who built empires, but couldn't rewrite this ending. Liam's death forced Simon to reflect on fame's cost and life's brevity, softening his voice and sharpening his focus on legacy over ambition. One Direction's shattered symbol became a mirror, showing that even the brightest lights can fade without warning. The man today. In 2025, at 65, Simon Cowell is no longer the ruthless judge of Saturday nights. On the Got Talent panel, his verdicts are counsel, his wit warmed by humility. His $15.5 million Beverly Hills mansion is a sanctuary where health comes first. Mornings begin with careful Pilates to protect his scarred spine, meals planned with doctors, low sodium, high fiber, antioxidants to fight fatigue. His vision, dimmed by years under stage lights, requires reading glasses, the fear of not seeing Eric's face clearly, a quiet terror. Eric is his greatest medicine. Bike rides along Malibu's coast, fumbling piano keys, bedtime stories rid with effort, but love. These are Simon's triumphs now. His empire, worth over $600 million, hums on with franchises, a $24 million Malibu mansion, a $45 million London estate, and a fleet of supercars gathering dust. A private jet flies rarely, a symbol of a man who has slowed down. Simon speaks of wealth with detachment, his will directing his fortune to foundations for children's health, education, and scholarships. "I don't want Eric to inherit money," he says. "I want him to inherit values, and I want children who begin with nothing to inherit chances I never had." His appearance tells a story of surrender. The era of Botox is gone, his hair streaked with gray, his frame slimmer from discipline. "I've stopped chasing youth," he confessed. "I'd rather chase memories with Eric." The physical scars, spine, arm, vision, linger, pain surging at night, anxiety whispering of dependence. Yet, Simon embraces fragility, turning it into gratitude. His projects now focus on impact, charity concerts, creative incubators, scholarships, not empire. He appears on television rarely, speaking of resilience over ratings. The legacy of scars. Simon Cowell's life is not a fairy tale. It's a war fought with scars, from a lonely childhood to the ashes of bankruptcy, from scandal to salvation, from near death to public ridicule. He has endured. His story teaches that legacy isn't built on flawless triumphs, but on the courage to rise after falling. The boy who craved affection gave millions a stage, only to learn that love, not applause, endures. His physical scars mirror the emotional ones: rejection, loneliness, loss. Yet, in Eric's laughter, in his philanthropy, in his choice to age authentically, Simon found purpose. Liam Payne's death reminded him that life is fragile, urging him to cling to presence over power. His journey asks us to reflect. Do we chase empires or empathy? Do we value possessions or moments? Simon, imperfect and scarred, shows that the greatest legacy is not in what we build, but in what we leave behind. Love, humility, and the courage to keep moving, even when broken. Closing call to action. Simon Cowell's story is a mirror for us all. What will you take from it? To slow down before life forces you to? To cherish laughter over applause? To invest in presence, not possessions? Share your reflections below, and join us in honoring a man whose scars teach us that empathy, not empire, is the truest measure of a life well lived. Subscribe for more untold stories, and let's celebrate the fragile, imperfect humanity behind the legends.